Do you think family is the safest place in the world? A place where you're loved unconditionally, where you never have to ask permission to breathe, to exist. Today's story will make you think again. A young woman grew up in what seemed to be the perfect family where everyone smiled, meals were always on time, and I love you was said every night before bed. But behind those smiles hid a twisted need for control, subtle psychological manipulation, and nightmares disguised under the name of love. When the mother, who once seemed like the perfect role model, became the one controlling every thought, every breath, and when you can no longer tell what's real and what's imagined, will you be brave enough to escape today? We'll hear the journey of survival and recovery of someone who was loved until she couldn't breathe and who finally learned to love herself. A true Reddit story that's haunting, painful, yet filled with hope. Chapter 1: The Frozen Legacy. I always thought my grandmother was the gentlest woman in the world. When I was a kid, I thought she was adorable. She always set out a portion of food for my grandfather at every dinner, even though he had died years before I was born. She would stroke his photo as if he were still alive. She never stopped telling stories about him, that he had been a naval officer, that he was so skilled at fixing cars no one ever dared argue with him, and that he loved her so much he never left her even after death. As a child, I thought that was romantic. The older I got, the more I started to find it a little strange, but I never questioned it. To me, she was the last safe place in my family. My parents were always tense, and my older sister, to put it mildly, had issues. My grandmother was the only one who always smiled at me, always told me I had my grandfather's eyes and carried his spirit inside me. She said I was special, that I was the chosen one. I thought it was just the affectionate talk of a slightly superstitious old lady until I turned 18. That day she called me down to the basement, a place I had never been allowed to enter alone. Since I was little, I'd been forbidden to go near the large freezer in the corner. She always said, "That's for meat, dear, very dangerous." But this time she unlocked it, removed the thick, padded cover on top, and pointed inside. "Do you know what this is?" I saw cold mist rising from a layer of dry ice. There were small test tubes, carefully numbered, lying still in a metal tray. "It's your grandfather's sperm," she said softly, as if showing me a treasured heirloom. "I've kept it for 40 years. I thought I misheard her. I laughed, a short, dry laugh. But she didn't laugh. "Your grandfather always wanted more children," she continued. "But he died too soon. I couldn't let that dream die with him." I stepped back. She stepped closer. Her hand landed on my shoulder, trembling with excitement. "You're the most perfect one. Same bloodline. Young, healthy, pure. You are the perfect vessel to bring your grandfather back into this world." I remember stammering. "What? Excuse me." "She was joking, right? I'm not joking," she said, and her eyes, the ones I'd always seen as soft and loving, were now shining. Not with affection, but with fanaticism. "Don't you understand?" she said. "Your eggs, his sperm, combined, a part of him will live again. A part of him will walk this earth once more." She had already arranged everything. A fertility clinic where the doctor was her old nursing school friend. A vitrification procedure scheduled for next week. Everything set in place as if I were nothing but a tool. I remember screaming. Not an angry scream, but the scream of an animal cornered. She didn't react like someone rejected. She reacted like someone insulted. "You're turning your back on the family," she said. "On your grandfather." I ran upstairs, my palms ice cold, my stomach twisting. I thought I could run away from it. I was wrong. Chapter 2: The Family Becomes a Prison. After running out of the basement that day, I had only one thought in my head: get out of here. I rushed to my room, stuffing clothes into my backpack, searching for my car keys. But they were gone. I checked my desk drawer, dresser wallet, even the pockets of old jackets. Nothing. When I decided to call a taxi, I found my phone had powered off. I plugged it in. No response. The charging cable had been cut clean through. She had prepared for this. I ran downstairs trying to get out the front door. The lock had been changed at some point without my knowing. The back door was blocked with a wooden bar. The windows had been screwed shut from the inside. I was living inside a sealed box, and I wasn't the one who sealed it. That's when I began to realize this wasn't some sudden burst of madness. This was a plan. It was a plan my grandmother had been nurturing and perfecting for years. I tried talking to my father. He was in the kitchen, expression blank eyes, fixed on his coffee cup, as if the entire universe was at the bottom of it. I begged him, "Dad, please. You know this is wrong." He just sighed and said something I'll never forget. "You don't understand. Your mother's lost too much already. We just want peace. Peace." While they planned to turn me into a living womb for a man who's been dead for decades, I found my mother in the living room, polishing my grandparents' wedding photo. When I told her I was going to call the police, she just looked up and said, her voice trembling, "You'll make everything worse." I didn't recognize them anymore. My parents were no longer the people who once held me when I had a fever, who wished me good night. Now they were wardens. I tried calling 911 from the landline in the living room. When the call connected, I realized I couldn't string together a sentence that made sense. How do you explain this without sounding completely delusional? "Hello, my grandmother is trying to impregnate me with my grandfather's sperm that's been frozen for 40 years. Does that sound believable to anyone?" The dispatcher suggested I consider family counseling. I hung up. That night I snuck into the basement intending to destroy the freezer, but it had a new lock. Next to it was a small security camera pointed straight at my face. When I returned to my room, I found my belongings rifled through. My laptop was gone. All sharp objects, scissors, metal hairpins were gone too. Even the bathroom mirror had been removed. My pillow had been slit open, and the cord from the bedside phone was missing. I started to realize I wasn't just being confined. I was being monitored. They no longer saw me as a person. I was a body to be protected in the most twisted way possible. My grandmother didn't need me. She needed my uterus. And the worst part was, I was beginning to understand that this wasn't the bottom of hell yet. Chapter 3: The First Night of Forced Submission. I had hoped I could endure a few more days, just long enough to wait for a chance to escape. But my grandmother wasn't going to wait. That night, I did the only thing left I could do: barricade my bedroom door with every movable piece of furniture I had. My dresser, my desk, even my bookshelf. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, trembling like a mouse, trying to build a fortress in a house full of cats. And then, just as I feared, she started banging on the door. "Sweetheart, don't fight this. Your grandfather is waiting," she shouted from the other side. Her voice cracked a sort of sob that made my hair stand on end. The next sound wasn't knocking, it was drilling. She was taking the door off its hinges. I couldn't breathe. I ran to the window hoping it was still a way out, but no. Wooden planks had been nailed over it from the outside, so solid I couldn't pry them loose with my bare hands. When the hinges screeched and the door crashed inward, I screamed, grabbing anything I could use as a weapon, a pen, a desk lamp, anything. But the first thing I saw was a turkey baster and a cold storage box. My grandmother walked in like she was a nurse in a maternity ward, not someone about to commit a crime. Her nightgown was stained with something dark. I didn't dare guess what it was. She spoke in a calm, almost instructional tone, as if reading a recipe. "If you won't come to the clinic, we'll do it the traditional way. Your grandfather never believed in modern medicine anyway." Behind her were my parents. My father was crying, actually crying, but he still held my arms down when I tried to run. "It'll be over soon," he whispered, unable to meet my eyes. "Just let her finish. She won't stop. She won't let you go." My mother said nothing. She only gripped my ankles tighter as I kicked. I screamed. I screamed until my throat burned raw. I called their names. I called Mom. I called Dad. I called anything that might awaken whatever shred of humanity they had left. They didn't respond. My grandmother just smiled. "I was a nurse before I met your grandfather," she said, holding the syringe like a sacred relic. "I could do this in my sleep." I saw her take something from the cooler. A vial. She kissed it. "Your grandfather is coming back," she whispered, almost like a prayer. I thrashed so hard the skin on my wrists tore my legs, bruising against the bed frame. But my parents kept holding me down, and my grandmother continued. I don't clearly remember what happened after that. I just remember the spinning of the light, my grandmother's sobs, and her voice echoing in my head, "He will live again. And you will be his mother." I blacked out as she set the syringe down next to the bed, and her smile was the last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me whole. Chapter 4, A Body Taken Over. I woke to sunlight filtering through the cracks in the wooden boards nailed over my window. The first thing I felt was pain. My whole body ached as if I'd been beaten, my spine heavy and weak. But what sent me into full-blown panic was when I placed a hand over my stomach and realized I didn't know what had actually happened. I was still wearing my clothes, no blood, no obvious signs, but nothing to guarantee that she hadn't done it. On my nightstand was a glass of orange juice and a small note written in that slanted handwriting I knew by heart. "Drink this, sweetheart. You need vitamins now." The nausea hit so hard I almost knocked the glass over. The room was no longer mine. My closet had been rummaged through. The mirror was gone. A baby monitor camera sat neatly on the bookshelf pointed directly at my bed. Beside it was a new stack of books. Complete Motherhood, Fetal Development, Week by Week, Nurturing the Mother's Spirit. I stepped out of my room, my legs trembling with every step. Down in the kitchen she was whisking eggs. There was no trace in her demeanor that she had violated me the night before. She was even wearing the old apron embroidered with roses, the one my grandfather had given her. My mother and father sat at the table silent, staring into their coffee cups as if the answers to all their guilt lay at the bottom. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and her face lit up like the sun sorta Europe. She came toward me, placing a hand on my stomach as if I were already 4 months pregnant. "Feeling any nausea? That's perfectly normal." I recoiled, but she pulled out a chair and forced me down into it. "I made you breakfast. Your grandfather loved eggs in the morning. They're good for the baby's brain." I pushed the plate away. My mother glanced at me, then back down. My father clenched his jaw but said nothing. I need to use the bathroom," I stammered. She smiled. "Of course. But don't lock the door. We don't want you to fall if you get dizzy in your condition." In your condition. In the bathroom, I found exactly what I feared, 5 different pregnancy tests, still in their boxes, lined neatly along the sink. A note stuck to the missing mirror read, "Test every morning until you see those beautiful 2 lines." I gripped the edge of the sink. The nausea came back this time not from pregnancy, but from sheer disgust. I no longer had control over my own body. I didn't know if anything was growing inside me, and the horrifying part was, if there was, it wasn't a child. It was the product of a violation of a sick obsession prepared over 20 years. A seed not born of love, but nurtured for the sole purpose of recreating someone who had already died. When I stepped out of the bathroom, she was on the sofa with an old photo album spread open. "Sit down, sweetheart. I want you to see your grandfather when he was young. See if you notice any features you share." I looked at the album, a man in a naval uniform standing next to an old Buick holding a baby who was my mother. And in every photo, my grandmother stood beside him, clutching him as if she believed he'd disappear if she let go. Such beautiful hands he had, didn't he? She said, stroking the photo. Doctor's hands, just like yours. Then she grabbed my wrist, pressing it to the photo. These hands will bring life again. I yanked my hand back. There's no baby. Her smile faltered for just a second. Not yet. But there will be. I made sure everything went smoothly last night. My heart felt like it dropped into a bottomless pit. I whispered, my voice breaking. What did you do to me? What had to be done? She said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You fought so hard. I was afraid you'd hurt yourself. So I gave you a little sleeping medicine in your dinner. I could barely stand holding onto the chair to keep from collapsing. Don't worry, she said, her voice soft, almost soothing. I was very careful. Used proper medical technique. The bastard was just to scare you. I have professional equipment. I'm a nurse, remember? After that, I barely heard her words. All I could think was one single screaming thought: I've been violated. In my own home. By the people who call themselves my family. And worse. I didn't know if there was any way left to escape. Chapter 5. Finding the crack. I'd once heard people say that if you stay in hell long enough, you learn how to see the light, even if it's just a thin crack in the wall. A few days after that night, I started to believe it was true. My grandmother followed me everywhere. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, vitamins, blood pressure checks, heart rate checks. I was nothing more than a biological project whose progress was being monitored. She recorded every detail in a small blue notebook. Day 3 after first insemination. Pulse steady. Ate all the eggs. No vomiting. Every night she would smile softly and say, "You're doing so well. Your grandfather would be so proud." And me, I learned to stay silent, to pretend, to play along. Because I knew if I rebelled again, I'd be drugged again, forced again, lose another piece of control over my own body. Then one afternoon, while I was showering with her, sitting outside the bathroom, whistling my grandfather's favorite tune, I noticed that one of the screws behind the mirror was loose. Not much, but loose enough that I could pry it slightly with my fingernail. I reached behind the mirror. Empty. Just a bit of dust. But then my finger touched something cold, metallic, and long. I pulled it out. A key. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I hid it under my towel, acting as normal as I could. When she came in to brush my hair and ramble on about how my hair looked just like your grandfather's when he was young, I just nodded, holding that key tight in my palm like a sacred secret. Back in my room, I tried it on the door lock. No luck. Tried it on the windows. Still nothing. Finally, I tried the old wooden jewelry box she kept hidden away. Click. It opened. Inside, I found something I never expected: my old ID card, some cash, and my high school flip phone. The battery was dead, but I knew if I could find a charger, if I could get power, I could contact someone. And most importantly, she didn't know I had it. That night, I pretended to finish all my dinner, even swallowed the 2 white vitamins she handed me without hesitation. But instead of actually swallowing, I tucked them under my tongue later, hiding them beneath the edge of my bed. Once she went to sleep, I began checking every outlet in my room, searching for a way to discreetly charge the phone. I knew one thing: chances like this don't come twice. If I wanted to escape this madness, I had to play by her rules, quietly, carefully, invisibly. That night, as I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the tiny red light of the baby monitor, I didn't feel as afraid as before. I felt hope. Fragile, yes. So small it could be snuffed out in an instant. But for me, at that moment, as long as I had a key and a little battery power, I still had a chance to survive. Chapter 6. Escape in the night. I didn't sleep for 3 nights straight. Not because I was scared, but because I was counting time. Every footstep my grandmother took, every time my mother got up for a glass of water, every time my father coughed. I memorized it all. I logged their habits in my mind like a biological clock. 9:05 p.m. Grandma turns off the living room light. 9:30 p.m. Mom locks the kitchen door. 12:17 a.m. Dad opens the bathroom door. 1:44 a.m. Total silence. And on the fourth night, I moved. I had found an old charging port hidden under the bookshelf, had to secretly strip copper wires and draw power from the desk lamp. It took me nearly 3 days to get just a few percent of battery into that old flip phone. And in those rare, precious minutes of power, I sent a message, just one sentence, to one person. Help. Old address. Don't call. Don't text back. That person was Mia, my high school classmate, former neighbor, and the only one who knew just how strange my family's secrets were. I didn't know if she still had the same number. I didn't know if the text would even send. But it was the only gamble I had. 2:11 a.m. I wore 2 layers of clothes. Hid the phone and cash in my inner pocket. The key I kept sewn into my pant cuff, tied with black thread. I didn't dare use the front door. Grandma had placed a small bell under the mat, the same trick she'd once used to track my grandfather when his memory started to slip, now repurposed to track me. I chose the second-floor bathroom window. I had measured the distance, loosened the screws days before. If I could get the wooden frame open, I could slip out, climb down the drainpipe, and drop onto the awning below. If I fell, I'd rather break my arm than stay here as a living incubator. I climbed onto the windowsill. The moment my foot touched the drainpipe, click. Her bedroom door opened. I froze. "Sweetheart!" Her voice called out. Close. Too close. I held my breath, shrinking back behind the curtain. "Are you okay? I heard something." I didn't answer. And then, footsteps slowly retreating. I climbed down. No thinking. No hesitation. The moment my feet hit the ground, I ran. No shoes. No coat. Just sprinting into the back road behind the house where darkness covered me and there were no cameras. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The cold cut through me, but I didn't stop. I ran until I reached the old abandoned gas station, hid behind a dumpster, waited. 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I began to lose hope. Thought maybe Mia had changed her number, that the text never went through. And then headlights flickered in the night. An old red car stopped about 30 feet away. The window rolled down. "You're actually still alive?" a familiar voice said. "Mia." I broke down sobbing like a child, throwing myself into her car, shaking so badly I couldn't form words. "It's okay," she said. "You're out now." But I knew, not really. Escaping my grandmother's house didn't mean escaping the obsession. It didn't mean I was safe. And more than anything, I knew they wouldn't let this go. Chapter 7. The hunt begins. I used to think that once I got out of my grandmother's house, I'd be free. All I had to do was walk out that door, and it would all be over: the white pills, the sweet hugs that smelled faintly of sedatives, the lullabies sung in a voice slick and waxy, covering the truth like a polished veneer. I was wrong. Mia took me to her place, a small ground-floor apartment, the windows not too big, but big enough that for the first time, I could actually feel air. She made me tea. Didn't ask questions, didn't push me to talk. She just sat beside me, one hand on my back, letting me shake like a cornered animal. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the corner, knees pulled up, staring at the faint glow of the bug lamp, trying to convince myself I'm safe. I'm free. And then 6 a.m., Mia's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Someone reported you're harboring a missing patient. Please contact us immediately." 1 minute later, "My granddaughter suffers from delusional disorder. She needs medication and medical supervision. We've already notified the police." I looked at Mia. Her face hardened. Without a word, she tossed her phone onto the couch. "They're actually insane," she muttered. I shook my head. "No, Mia. They've been insane. Now they're just making their insanity legal." We yanked the SIM card from her phone and left the apartment within 20 minutes. No time to brush teeth. No time to change clothes. Mia called a friend who worked with a women's abuse support organization. They told us, "Go to the shelter on Maple Street, but be careful, your family might have already filed a missing person alert." I asked, "They can do that?" "Even though I'm an adult," she replied, If they have a psych evaluation saying you're unstable, they can. I laughed, a hollow, empty laugh. I knew my grandmother had been preparing for this for a long time. And then, just as I feared, while I sat in the passenger seat with my hoodie pulled low, a police car drove past, lights flashing. Then it made a U-turn. I sank down in my seat. Mia shit. Me don't stop. No matter what. They didn't follow, no sirens, but I knew they had seen me. That night, on the Old Neighborhoods community Facebook page, a post appeared. If anyone sees my granddaughter, long brown hair, about 5'5", history of mental illness, recently ran away from home, please contact us immediately. She needs medical help. Family is worried. Please help. Dozens of sympathetic comments. Hearts. Shares. Not a single person asked, why does she need to be locked up? No one asked, did she say anything? No one knew the truth. My grandmother had won public opinion. Again. Mia looked at me, brows furrowed. What's your move? We can't stay here. I nodded. I need to get to someone who can help me take back my legal rights. A lawyer, an independent doctor, someone not brainwashed by my grandmother's smile. Mia, you know anyone? I was silent. Then I remembered. Uncle Luke. My mother's older brother, the one who left home when I was little after a huge fight with my grandmother. He'd been a lawyer once, now living up north, no contact with the family, for 10 years. My mother had always called him the traitor. My grandmother had once torn up his photo in front of me, saying he was a man who didn't know how to preserve the bloodline. I thought, if anyone understood this madness, it would be him. I turned to Mia. We're going to North Carolina. Chapter 8. The one the family called the traitor. I don't really remember Uncle Luke's face. Only a vague recollection of his voice, deep, gruff, quick to scold, but never shouting. Never using silence as a weapon like my grandmother did. Never laying a hand on anyone, even in anger. He vanished from our family when I was 7. One winter morning after a fight, I overheard through the crack in my bedroom door his voice roaring at my grandmother. You're not a saint. You're sick. Then came the sound of something breaking. Silence. And he was gone. My mother never spoke of him again except when she wanted to teach me a lesson. You want to be like your uncle. Run away. Pretend you're some moral hero. Then die alone. I used to believe her. Until now. We drove through the night, following the GPS to a small town in North Carolina. Mia took the wheel. I stayed awake to keep watch. By morning, we were standing in front of an old wooden house, moss clinging to the roof, the yard overgrown but the gate freshly painted. A bell on the door. No cameras, no sensors. It felt safe. I pressed the bell. A soft chime. Waited. No one came. Pressed it again. And then the door cracked open. A man with silver in his beard, hollow cheeks, and glasses peered out at me. You are... I opened my mouth, but my throat tightened. In that moment, I realized just how small, ragged, and pathetic I must have looked. I'm Emma, I whispered, Lily's daughter. His eyes narrowed, then widened. He opened the door, slowly scanning every inch of my face. Come in. The house was unnervingly quiet. No family photos, no TV, just books. Endless shelves of books, and the faint smell of coffee in the air. We sat down. Mia kept her eyes on me. I didn't know where to begin. He poured water, then sat across from me. His gaze wasn't prying, but it wasn't soft either. You ran away. I nodded. Being hunted, I nodded again. He sighed, pulled an unlit cigarette from his pocket, and set it on the table just to hold it. Finally. Another one who understands. We talked for hours. I told him everything. From the family therapy, the tradition of love, to the white pills, and the nighttime escape. He didn't interrupt. Just listened. Occasionally shook his head. Sometimes crushed the cigarette between his fingers until it bent. When I told him the part about my grandmother planning to keep me to bear a child, he slammed his hand on the table. Fucking hell. I flinched. Mia just rested her hand on my shoulder. He exhaled sharply, then stood. You'll stay here a few days. I'll call a lawyer, someone I trust. I looked up at him. Will they believe me? I mean, if she waves around some psych evaluation if they say I'm delusional. He looked straight into my eyes, unblinking. I know her better than anyone. She could convince an entire town the sun rises in the west, but I know. I've been inside that furnace of madness, and I got out. I swallowed hard. Then why didn't you save my mom, or save me sooner? He turned away, voice low. Because your mother chose to stay? But you're the first one to run. Silence. Heavy. That night I slept on an armchair in his small library. No locks, no heart monitors, just the sound of wind through the window and the soft yellow glow of a desk lamp. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of her, didn't dream of pills, didn't dream of silk-tied ropes made of sweet words. I slept. Actually, slept. Chapter 9. The Counterattack. The next morning I woke to the smell of real coffee. Not the so-called healthy coffee my grandmother made the whole family drink, the kind I later learned had a mild sedative mixed in. No, this was actual ground coffee, strong, bitter, real. Uncle Luke had been up for a while. He was on the phone and the kitchen door half closed, voice low enough that I couldn't make out the words, but I knew things were getting serious. When he hung up, he came toward me with 2 mugs of coffee. You'll meet my lawyer this afternoon. She used to work in social services, then switched to handling reversal cases, situations like yours. I wrapped both hands around the mug. Didn't drink, just let it warm me. I still can't believe I'm actually doing this. He nodded. You don't have to believe. You just have to keep going. The meeting took place in a small cafe in the next town over where nobody knew me, and I didn't have to hide under a hoodie or wear sunglasses like some fugitive. Her name was Camille, around 40 hair, in a neat bun black blouse, and a gaze so direct I felt like I was looking into a mirror. She listened as I told the whole story again, but this time she cut in, at the critical moments. What kind of pills? Any prescription? She said they were vitamins. Who prescribed them? No one. She said a family doctor gave her private advice. You have the pill name. I bit my lip. I have 1 bottle I managed to hide in my coat pocket. It's still with Mia. Camille nodded. Good. Keep it. Don't throw it away. She jotted something down, then asked, Were you ever hit? I shook my head. So how did she control you? I answered. Through kindness, through conditional love, by making me believe that if I stepped past that doorway, I'd die. Camille stopped writing, then looked up at me. You're not a typical victim. I froze. What do you mean you're a living witness to a very rare kind of control psychological abuse through caretaking? I've seen it in a few cases of toxic parenting, but never with a grandchild. She tilted her head. Are you willing to take this to court? I didn't answer right away. I remembered my grandmother's face as I left. Not pain. Not helplessness. Challenge. I met Camille's eyes. Where when 3 days later Camille did something I didn't think was possible. She secured a temporary protective order. I was officially no longer missing. No longer on the needs-to-be-found list. On paper, I was a free citizen. But that freedom was fragile. My grandmother wouldn't let it go. She'd hire a lawyer. She'd try to get emergency guardianship for mental health reasons. She'd use photos of me curled up in a corner, half-coherent texts I'd sent my mother during my depression. She'd drag neighbors in to testify, and me, I'd bring the truth. Camille began gathering evidence. She called Mia in to give a statement. She contacted the local clinic to verify the vitamins my grandmother had given me, sending samples to a lab. Uncle Luke started tracking down anyone who had ever worked in my grandmother's house, from housekeepers to drivers, to see if anyone else had been adjusted using her methods. Piece by piece, the puzzle flipped over. People once dismissed as too sensitive or unable to understand family culture, began surfacing with chilling stories. A woman who had been my mother's classmate, who walked out after one dinner with my family, now a nurse in another state. A man who had dated my mother for 3 months before breaking up because he couldn't stand her mother, now a teacher willing to testify. An entire list of people who had passed through my perfect family and gone straight into therapy. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't crazy. I was just the last surviving one old enough to tell the story. Chapter 10. The courtroom, the testimony, and the temporary ending. I used to think that all I had to do was stand in front of a judge, tell the whole truth, and justice would automatically be on my side. But no. Justice, like any version of the truth, doesn't simply appear. It has to be dragged out into the light. Forced if necessary. On the first day in court, I wore the plain white blouse Camille had picked out. No makeup, no hoodie, no hiding anymore. Across the room, my grandmother. I didn't think she'd come. I thought she'd send a lawyer, maybe a fake apology and a carefully worded statement. But no, she came herself. Wearing a deep purple dress, the same color she always wore when she needed to project the image of a selfless matriarch. Sitting beside her was my mother, her eyes red, hands clasped tightly together. I couldn't tell if it was shame or an act playing the role of the helpless, heartbroken mother. They didn't speak to me. They didn't have to. Their eyes said it clearly, "You're the traitor." The hearing opened with Camille's statement, short, precise, but carrying weight. She presented the bottle of pills I'd been taking for 2 years. The lab confirmed a mild sedative, no commercial label, used in certain anxiety treatment protocols, but absolutely not approved for someone without a medical prescription. No prescription existed. No medical records from any hospital or clinic in the area. My grandmother's lawyer objected, calling it family care. Camille didn't argue. She simply handed over a printout of text messages between my grandmother and her supplier with lines like, "This batch is lighter than the last." The girl's starting to get suspicious. The courtroom went silent for several seconds. I could hear my grandmother's teeth grind. Next came Mia's testimony. She recounted everything from the moment she found me to the time she helped me escape and the threatening messages she received afterward. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. We'll sue you for kidnapping." Camille presented the screenshots verified and timestamped by the carrier. Then came the former nurse who had worked in my grandmother's house. Her voice shook as she told the court how she was fired after asking why I was unusually drowsy all the time. And finally, Uncle Luke. He spoke about his relationship with my grandmother, how she had controlled my mother, how the entire family bowed to her, and why he chose to leave, because I knew if I stayed, I'd become part of it. I was the last to testify. I told everything, without tears, without theatrics, just the truth. The truth that I once believed my grandmother loved me more than anyone. The truth that I once thought if I left her, I'd die. And the truth that I had survived. I ended with one sentence: I don't want revenge. I just want my name back, without the word crazy attached to it. When it was over, the judge requested time to review the case. I sat there in silence. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't turn toward my grandmother. But I knew somehow for the first time in her life she was afraid, not of the law, but of me, because I wasn't silent anymore. A week later, Camille called me, her voice calm, but with a relief I could hear even through the phone. "We won the first round. The court denied the emergency guardianship request. You have full legal rights. Your grandmother is barred from contact." I sank down into my chair. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat and breathed. This wasn't the end. I knew my grandmother wouldn't give up. I knew my mother wouldn't forgive me. I knew there would always be people who thought I was the ungrateful granddaughter. But I also knew something else. The truth doesn't need forgiveness to exist. It only needs to be spoken. Chapter 11, The Darkness. Behind the Light. After the court's decision, everyone seemed to think I would finally feel relieved. Camille hugged me tight, saying, "You're finally free." Uncle Luke squeezed my hand and told me he was proud. Mia cried more than I expected, and I thought, Maybe I should cry with her, but I couldn't, not because I wasn't happy, but because I didn't know how to feel happy after everything I'd been through. I moved in temporarily with Uncle Luke. Camille and Mia took turns visiting each week. We'd have dinner together, listen to old music, play Uno, and never bring up the past, unless I wanted to. I started keeping a journal, not to record memories, but to check my own. I was afraid that maybe I had imagined it all, that maybe it was just one long dream, and one day my grandmother would walk in saying, "It's time for your medicine, sweetheart." The nightmares still came. I no longer saw her standing at my bedside, but I dreamed of sitting in a blinding white room, a voice echoing from hidden speakers. "We love you. We're doing this for you. Don't think. Don't resist. Just love us back." I'd jolt awake in the middle of the night, my shirt damp with cold sweat. Sometimes I swore I could smell the medicine on my pillow. Sometimes I heard footsteps no one else heard. Camille called it a trauma response. I called it the darkness after freedom, because no one tells you this. Freedom hurts too. I tried everything: meditation, music, gardening, painting. Some days I laughed for hours. Other days I couldn't leave my room. Once I agreed to a video call with my mother at my lawyer's request. She looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us spoke for the first 30 seconds. Then she said, "You think you've won, don't you?" I just stared at her. Silent. No anger. No reaction. And then I answered softly, "But I think I survived." I ended the call and I cried. For the first time, I truly cried. Not from anger, not from pain, but because I knew I was no longer a hostage to my own fear. That summer, I started walking outside more. One morning, I met a 10-year-old girl in the park playing Jenga by herself. I sat down beside her and asked, "Not playing with friends?" She shrugged. "No one likes me. I'm weird." I smiled and handed her a little stone I'd found. "You know, the weird ones are often the bravest of all." She smiled back. And I did too. In that moment, I understood something: I didn't need to forget everything to move forward. I just had to stop asking my pain for permission to be happy. Chapter 12: Recovery and a New Life. After everything that happened, the atmosphere in the family felt entirely different. The children who had once been tested, who had once lived in fear, were now learning how to love without pain. Emma, Maya, Sarah Lily, and Helen, all of them survived safe, and together they began building a network of support for one another. Emma still carried her scars. She still flinched at sudden noises, but day by day, she was learning to trust the world around her. She was beginning to understand that surviving and accepting help didn't mean betraying family, it meant surviving so she could love and protect others. Maya went to live with a distant aunt, learning how to adjust to a normal life, one filled with joy and proper care. Helen, Lily, and Sarah had already prepared everything in advance: a home, a lawyer, a therapist, all to ensure that no one could ever manipulate or endanger their younger cousins again. We went on our first picnic together in years, a trip with no watchful, controlling eyes, no heavy, unspoken sighs, no hidden drugs in the food, and no invisible fear threading through every movement. I remember Emma laughing loudly without covering her mouth the way she used to. And I, the girl who once couldn't bear to look in a mirror, lifted a camera and took a picture of that moment. Not to post online, not to use as evidence, but to keep for myself proof that we had survived. Sometimes I still had nightmares, but now I knew how to wake myself up. I didn't need anyone to rescue me anymore. I no longer saw Camille as a savior, but as a friend and adult I could trust. We didn't always agree, but Camille never left when I said something hard. She stayed, and she listened. Uncle Luke started drawing again. I'll never forget the day he handed me a sketch. In it, I saw myself. Not the girl who had been manipulated, but a person walking across a bridge light ahead of her, dark forest behind. I asked him, "Will I really be able to forget it all?" He shook his head. but you'll learn not to let it decide who you are. I still haven't seen my mother again. I'm not sure if that day will ever come. And honestly, I no longer need it to in order to heal. I learned how to forgive not others, but myself. Forgive myself for the way I once bowed my head. Forgive myself for the way I once believed I deserved to be controlled. And then one day, I looked in the mirror, not to check if my eyes were red, but to smile. A real smile. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, but because I knew I had chosen this new life for myself. If someone were to ask me, do you wish it had all happened differently? I would say yes. But I don't hate the way it happened anymore, because sometimes to find your true self, you have to leave the place that once called itself home. In the end, this story isn't just about a manipulative mother. It isn't just about fear or control or the kind of wounds you can't see. It's about choice. The choice to survive. The choice to say no even to the person you once loved most. The choice to forgive not for others, but for yourself. If you've ever been hurt by your own family, if you've ever been called too sensitive, overreacting, or ungrateful simply because you wanted to be yourself, you are not alone. And sometimes survival isn't enough. You deserve to live fully. Thank you for listening to this story here on True Reddit Reads. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment or share it, because maybe your story is waiting to be told too.